G'day guys! The Chaos Space Marines took some pretty severe nerfs in the recent balanced data slate, with Chosen, Chaos Lords, Accursed Cultists all getting rules changes and points increases. However, what this has done is given a little bit of room to breathe for some of the other units in the Chaos Space Marine lineup that are still truly insanely overpowered. So today I got Jeremy Martino, WTC gold medalist, on to talk about the Chaos Space Marine Terminators with Abbott on the despoiler, and how this unit is going to define the Chaos Space Marine meta going forward in competitive Warhammer 40k tournaments. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's get stuck into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
Today's video is brought to you by Proxy Wars. Head over to their website if you want to show some support to those who support this channel. Right, Jess, thanks for coming on. We've got the balanced data slate in our hands now. Chaos Space Marine Terminators are looking real interesting. So we've had significant nerfs to the Forge Fiend, which is one of the things that used to make Chaos Space Marine Terminators a bit of a liability, because there was that prevalence of 3 damage shooting and the devastating wounds. We've also had things like the Chosen go up, which makes the Terminators more competitive comparatively. And there's been a bunch of other changes throughout the faction, throughout the meta, that have made Terminators more interesting to most people. And you've been running Terminators pretty much the whole time. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this unit. So I guess first, let's start by, do you agree with that sort of general analysis on Terminators being more relevant in the meta?
I definitely do. I think that even before, I think it was the last video we did together, we were talking about the lead up to the LVO meta.
Yeah.
And obviously that was using the previous data slate. And we're talking about why Terminators were not an S tier choice and why like maybe it would be better to go for other options. And the main reasons were what you just said. I think having so many Forge Fiends around that force you to kind of commit to the Nurgle strat on the Terminators. And not just that, but sometimes if you have the Terminators near a board edge, maybe the Forge Fiend can come on and actually get in within 12.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of threat, and that constant screening was quite a big liability.
Yeah. I also think because Chaos Space Marines took so many nerfs across the board, I think fewer people are going to run them. So that means, first of all, you're going to see fewer Forge Fiends because of the nerfs to that unit specifically. You're also going to see fewer of them due to the nerfs to the faction.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that, Chosen are going to be a lot less popular means that the urge people are going to have something in their list that's effective at dealing with 3 wound models is going to go down. Now, two damage weapons are going to become more relevant, and as a result, I think the Terminators are going to slide in.
And also less Chaos Lords, which just went in. And if you're taking either if you're taking a unit of them with Abaddon or just on its own or with a Chaos Lord or whatever, having a Chaos Lord that can just go in and do big 3 damage dev wound burst. Yeah. Having less of those to worry about is obviously also a buff.
Yeah, for sure. So I thought it would be interesting if we do a video and we just really hammer in on this one unit, talk about all of the different ways that you can load them out, the different ways that you can use them, the different strats that are relevant on them, the different things that you want to put in the list to supplement them, the strengths and the weaknesses of them, how you deploy them. Let's just go real hard on this one unit and sort of break it down for people.
Sure.
So I guess probably the best place to start is with the loadout. So when you're fielding a unit, what are your thoughts? Is unit 5, unit 10? What marks?
So I mean, it's I think there's options for all the different ways you can do it. The different loadouts, there's kind of merits to all of them. So we've spoken about this before, and I think you'd be really good at explaining the idea of the unit of 5.
Yeah.
I think the unit of 5, a lot of people just think you either go 10 or none. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think 5 is also fine.
Yeah. So my thoughts on the unit of 5, it depends whether or not you want to attach characters to it or not, but they're actually kind of self-reliant in a lot of ways, because if you deep strike it or rapidly ingress it into cover or out of line of sight, people are going to struggle to deal with it. They've got the 2-up saves, they got full reroll hits just inbuilt into their profile, which means they still get massive utility from the dark packs, because you can still just fish for those 6s or fish for the 5s if you're Mark of Nurgle and you're trying to get extra shots, or Mark of Khorne unit and you're going in for those lethal hits. You can just go, cool, anything that's not a 5, I'm going to re-roll the lot.
Yeah.
So I think they're just a really efficient little package on its own. You don't need to spend CP to give them that power. They're just good. But also, if you want to add characters, you get a lot of utility when you do have the bigger unit, because obviously the value that character adds spills across the whole unit. So whether that be adding Abaddon to give the whole unit of 10 all 4 marks of chaos, and also the other buffs that he is able to provide, or whether it be by adding a Lord for free armor of contempt on the whole unit, that's really interesting as well.
Yeah.
So when you're running, let's talk about the 10-man with Abaddon, because that's the one you've got the most experience with. So I think you're probably able to speak to that the best. You've got a Mark of Chaos to give them. What's your sort of thoughts now?
So knowing that Abby gives them all 4 when he's there, so when he's in the unit, they're going to have all of them.
Yeah.
It kind of means that you have to think about the situation that Abby's not in the unit.
Yeah.
There's 2 ways that will happen. Like, the first way that you won't have Abby in the unit is that you decide, for whatever reason, not to deploy him with the Terminators.
Yeah.
And that used to be something that would happen more commonly. Like, there would be contingencies in the past where, for example, if you're playing against a CSM player with 3 Chaos Lords and 3 small units of Chosen, I think deploying Abby in the Terminators is just a mistake.
Yeah.
In those games, I would actually deploy Abby on his own.
Yeah.
And then that way you have a little... Well, he becomes his own kind of beat stick unit that if he gets traded on, like if the Chaos Lord and, say, a unit of 5 Chosen decides to attack Abby, you can pay the CP to fight on death.
Yeah.
And then on a 3-up, he's going to get to slap them back.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that only really works if he's on his own is because if you've got a big unit of 10 Terminators and Abaddon's in it somewhere, if they hit you from an angle, they can use precision to allocate attacks to Abaddon, and then when he dies, he's so far away
Can't
that
fight on
through
that.
pile-ins and stuff, he can't fight on
So,
that.
exactly.
Whereas if he's a unit on his own, they actually have to get in base contact with him to hit him, and therefore his fight on death
Right.
is guaranteed.
So deploying him on his own, there's merit to it, and it's been done before. Like Manny Chima in that list that people were running in the past that had all the Accursed Cultists.
Yeah.
Normally, you would have Abby on his own, or with 5 Legionaries, and it's quite commonplace to see that running around, and he's perfectly fine like that. So in the modern meta, where maybe the Chaos Lords aren't as prevalent, when would you decide to deploy him on his own? I think you still have to be worried about the Incarn, and against some Eldar matchups, if they've got the right list, having Abby in the 10 Termies, the Incarn's going to do the exact thing you just outlined.
Yeah.
He's going to
hit from an angle.
He's going to hit from an angle, and then he's going to make it so that you can't fight on death with Abby, and he's just going to kill Abby.
Yeah.
And then your Terminators might lack the punch to kill the Incarn back.
Yeah.
So
you can insulate yourself against that with some very tricky placing of your models. Like if you place them in such a way that there's like a ring of Terminators around and Abaddon's in the middle, well, he's going to be able to pile in to be within base contact of whichever model he needs to in order to fight. But that really limits the scope of the unit, because you can't then string across objectives.
Correct.
You can't hide those
absolutely,
sorts of
and you can, and these are the things you need to think about: is how to deploy the unit in a way that Abby can always pile in to fight on death.
Yeah.
However, the situations now where you deploy him out of the unit are just less common.
Yeah.
So now it's more the thinking of, well, what happens if he dies to precision, and then you want that Terminator unit, like what mark are you going to want it to have after Abby dies?
Yeah.
And then that kind of becomes a bit complicated, because you think, well, do I want the mark of Nurgle? Because maybe I'm going to have a unit of 5 or 6 left, and maybe the mark of Nurgle is still relevant. Or do I want them to have a mark that then lets them resurrect a model and move out and push, like the Zench mark? Or do I want them to have the Slanesh mark to be able to advance and charge?
Yeah.
I actually think it's really situational. I don't know if there's a correct answer just across,
There is one thing that's also worth noting, was that in the balanced data slate, they updated the reroll hits and wounds stratagem to now be just reroll wounds and only able to be used on undivided units. So I think that potentially makes an argument for making them undivided, because then you can go in and they get the reroll hits, and then you can spend a CP to also get reroll wounds. That's something to factor in as well. However, given that you've already got reroll hits and lethal hits, you're probably going to be putting a ton of wounds on whatever your target is anyway.
That's a really good consideration, because that's a stratagem that's locked to undivided now.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily know. I think I could probably tell you which ones I wouldn't pick. I probably wouldn't pick Khorne.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's so situational that you'll want that to go that way. But, you know, it's hard to say. I would probably go with Nurgle. Just because if in the situation that a unit comes in, assassinates Abby, and kills maybe 2 or 3 Terminators, and you have a unit of 6 or 7, 8 Terminators left, having access to the Mark of Nurgle complicates them, and still, even with the nerfed Mark of Nurgle, still makes the unit really difficult to navigate. And I think that's probably the most breaking... The only other one that might have the same significance is Slaanesh. Because advancing and charging and shooting is a really good option as well.
I would be leaning towards Tzeentch, and this is really interesting because it just shows that there's no real wrong answer here. Because I would be leaning towards Tzeentch because while Slaanesh get advance and charge, we're talking about a scenario where the unit has already taken significant casualties. So being able to resurrect a model out in front is kind of like an advance and charge because it's going to give you a negative length, and it also gives you back a Terminator. And then the fact that you've got a ton of bolters in the unit, being able to get, you know, the lethals on 5+ with reroll hits means that those bolters, even when it is a small unit, are going to put out a ridiculous...
That's really compelling because you are right. And you, in this situation where Abby's dead, as you said, you're almost always going to have lost a model. And when you resurrect at that 2-inch coherency, you're gaining a 40 mil base in 2 inches. So that works out to be just under 4 inches.
Which is a decent advance rate, right? And it's also a free guy. So the only pushback on that is that you aren't actually advancing 4 because the rest of the models aren't moving. Which is sometimes you want the rest of the models to move to line up angles and things. But I think it's really genuinely quite close, and it doesn't really matter that much. I think you look more at your list and maybe lists you think you're going to play, and just play for feel, because I think any of those options are fine. And I think it'll map into people's play styles, right? The way that they feel they want to wield the unit. Just pick the appropriate mark for that. Can't really go wrong.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.
What about weapon loadouts? So you've got there's a few decisions to make when picking a unit. One of them is heavy flamers or Reaper autocannons. What are your thoughts on that?
I like the Reapers personally. I just think it's more shots.
The range is good.
Range is good. They've got dev wounds, which is nice. They also have sustained hits, which means that if for whatever reason you're picking as your, like when you're activating your Dark Pact, if you pick lethal hits, they also get sustained hits. So that's kind of nice as well. Flamers are good, and flames are interesting on things like Overwatch, but I feel like the range limitations just make the autocannons better.
And I feel like flamers, you need to hit like critical mass of them. Like one flamer in a unit isn't scary in Overwatch. You know, 2 flamers in a unit's not really scary. It's like it's only when you've got like 5 that then you're like, okay, now flamers are you're going to spend the CP on that Overwatch. So I agree. I think autocannons are pretty clear in that they are the better option. I don't think there's much debate to be had there. What about the combi bolters versus combi weapons? That's an interesting one because I've seen a lot of people take different takes on this.
So for me, when I was trialing this was when it all first came out last year. It didn't take me too long to decide that I preferred the normal combi bolters. Because the volume of shots for me was a very interesting power that then the unit gained when you're able to throw out 32 shots from the normal combi bolters, plus another 8 shots from the 2 Reaper autocannons. There are 40 shots that have exploding 5s if you go with the Nurgle, if you're popping the sustained hits. That's a lot of bullets. And I feel like that is something that makes the unit really unique in what it can achieve. However, I can totally understand that, especially in an adjusting meta, that having the ability to have dev wounds on the whole unit and the whole unit be putting out like anti-infantry 4+ dev wounds.
Yeah.
That can also be exploding and also be generating more hits and then potentially even rerolling wounds if you pop the strat. That's very strong. And that can just totally rinse a Marine and elite infantry unit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the my sort of take on it is that the combi bolters are better into like light infantry and vehicles just through volume of shots, whereas the combi weapons are better into elite infantry. So I guess you sort of want to look at the meta that you're facing, and if it's lots and lots of custodies or whatever, then, but I mean, custodies get the feeling of pain against it, so maybe it's not necessarily relevant in that matchup. But like the point is, if you're up against a lot of elite infantry, tough elite infantry, then you probably want the combi weapons. Everything else, combi bolters. So I would probably model mine with the combi bolters, and that would be my starting point.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's really meta dependent, because I typically do run the bolters, and there's some things the bolters are really good at dealing with.
Yeah.
But into things like anything with a 2-up save, they're not very good at all.
Yeah.
To the point it's almost negligible.
Yeah.
Whereas the combi weapons don't care if you have a 2-up save.
Yeah.
If you're shooting at Marines or Terminators, and I know we're going to probably start seeing more Terminators, that's something that they deal with really well.
Yeah.
Because if you're able to say, here's 16 shots of exploding 5s to hit,
Yep.
with full rerolls to hit, you might generate 22, 23 hits.
Yep.
But then if you pop this reroll wounds, you're going to be putting about 16 mortal wounds, maybe more, on your opponent.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like, that's going to take out a whole aggressor unit or
Yeah.
whatever you're shooting at.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
pretty good.
So either one's probably more or less fine then?
I think so. And this is the kind of challenging thing, because people kind of want to know, they want a bit of direction. They want like, well, what do I do? I think either is fine. The reason why I feel like the safer option is the bolters, like what you said, is that if you look at like the combat profile of the Terminators,
Yeah.
they don't have a problem dealing with elite infantry. It's mainly because of having Abby in the unit and how powerful he is in combat. And also the unit has a lot of power fists, which makes them really good in combat.
Yeah.
And I think, at least historically, Chaos haven't had too many problems dealing with elite infantry through things like Forge Fiends.
Yeah.
So it made sense, at least historically, to go with the bolters.
Yeah. So perhaps in a world where we're not taking Forge Fiends, we're not taking Obliterators, we're not taking, those sorts of things, we're leaning more into things like Warp Talons. Maybe in that world, these guys need to fill a different role and they need to go into the combi weapons. But yeah, I think, again, when you get these situations where, you can have a conversation back and forth and there's pros and cons on either side, well, then that tells me that they're probably both just acceptable answers.
Right. I agree.
So either one is more or less fine. And then as for melee weapon loadouts, you just put as many chain fists and power fists in there as possible.
Yeah, so you end up with, if I recall correctly, you end up with 6 with power fists,
Yep.
2 with chain fists, and 2 that retain their accursed weapons.
Yeah. And then those last 2 could go double accursed, or they could go accursed and combi weapon or combi bolter.
I think yes.
Yeah, and you prefer the weapon, the ranged weapon, right?
I would rather keep the bolter.
Yeah.
I think that when you kind of map it out, having those bolters just adds that weight of fire that really matters.
Yeah.
The times that having that extra attack or the reroll wounds, it's really niche because it means that you're not popping reroll wounds in combat, and it means that that extra attack really is going to matter. So I think you just keep the gun.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, speaking of strats like that you're popping the reroll wounds, are there any particular strats that you found yourself using on those Terminators often that people should know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important. And the reason why I think this is the type of list you need practice with, you need to really commit to some practice with this unit.
It's because it has access to every strat.
It does. You can pop a lot of CP on this unit. You find yourself sometimes dumping 3, maybe 4 CP in a turn on the unit.
Yeah.
Maybe more, which sounds, you might be, well, how do you do that? Well,
you save up for 1 turn, you flip a card, you use Abaddon to generate a CP, then it's turn 3 and you've got 4 CP.
Yeah.
That's the turn that you bring them out, and you just go, cool, here's every strat.
Right. So, at least in the past, the Nurgle strat is something that you could just, use kind of as just this tool of just, no, you're not shooting me, you're not shooting me. Obviously now with the nerf, it becomes a lot more situational, but still extremely strong.
Yeah.
In that Terminators are not a unit that if they line up one unit on, they're going to kill you.
Yeah.
They need to line up several units to kill you. So having an ability to turn off shooting within 18 is still really powerful, especially because if you deploy them in the right way, the first unit they bring within 18 to shoot you, they might shoot the other unit out of range.
Yeah.
And especially when you have a big footprint, that's something you can set up in a way that if they shoot you, the first unit will shoot themselves out of range.
Yeah.
So having the access to the Nurgle strat is super powerful, especially when you combine it with the next two we'll talk about, which is the Resurrect and the Advance and Charge.
Yeah.
Because if they put themselves at 18 inches to shoot you, you then have, like we can map this out, you have access to a Resurrection, which we know adds just under 4 inches of movement, because you're gaining 2 inches from the coherency and a 40 mil base, which is less than 2 inches.
Yeah.
So let's call it 3.5. It's a little bit more than 3.5, but 3.5 inches. Then you get to advance, shoot, and charge. So you're going to be moving 5 plus d6, and then charging 2d6.
Yep.
So you're.
And if you treat that advance as another 3.5, you combine that with the 3.5 from the Resurrection, you've got essentially 7 inches.
Yes, approximately.
It's sort of hard to measure.
It's hard because you've got 3d6 that are variable.
Yeah.
So it depends on the advance roll, but if you want to use that as a general measure, we say the res for 3.5 and the advance for 3.5 plus 5-inch movement is 12.
Yep.
And then we have a 2d6 charge. So if someone's 16 inches away, we've got a very good chance of getting in.
Yeah.
So they essentially, if they're committing to you, they're making a bet they're going to knock you over.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to knock over a unit that's as tough as T5 4 up in Vol is very swingy.
Yeah.
They have access to Armor of Contempt, which is another strat we can talk about. If Abby's in the unit, you're not going to be popping it for free. But that's why I said you got that big turn where you say, okay, you're coming at me. You've put everything within 18, or the big unit that you're going to shoot me is within 18. So there's no point necessarily popping the Nurgle strat. It just gives me stealth. Instead, I'll go Armor of Contempt.
Yeah.
And so where you thought you were going to kill 5 or 6 Terminators, you're only going to kill 3.
Yeah.
And now I res 1 and knock that unit back. So I think all the strats, like for those people that are using this unit, and obviously people that are familiar with Chaos, pretty much the whole playbook of strats is in effect for this unit.
Yeah.
They're all good. Like the Nurgle strat's good on them. Resurrecting a model and advanced shoot and charge is really good for them. Armor of Contempt's obviously very good on 2-up save models.
Yep.
Fight on Death's good.
Yeah. Fight on Death is really annoying when somebody goes, okay, cool, I can't deal with you with range attacks because of the Nurgle strat. You're just going to pull yourself out of range. And by pull yourself out of range, we obviously mean like the unit is strung out over a distance. If they bring in 1 unit from this angle and 1 unit from that angle, and both of them 18 inches away, they shoot with this one first, you pull these casualties, and now that one's not within 18, and therefore can't shoot, right? So just for, if people weren't sure. So if they're worried about that sort of matrix that you've laid out, they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to have to go in and deal with it in combat. So they throw their big combat brick in, and you just go, cool, fight on death on a 3+. If they kill 4 or 5 Terminators, they're probably going to lose the unit that they just threw in, and then it's going to tick over to your turn. You're going to be able to resurrect a model that they just killed, and then go back in and do
and the
damage.
fight on death can also act as a pseudo interrupt, because if they charge you with 2 units, then you can decide to die like with the models that are in fighting range of the unit that hasn't fought yet.
Yeah.
So they might charge you with let's just say a unit of Sword Brethren and a unit of Crusaders, and they fight with the unit of Sword Brethren first.
Yeah.
Well, then you take the guys near the Crusaders off, and then some of them will fight on death and kill some Crusaders.
Yeah.
And that will further minimize casualties from their second fight.
Yeah, and it's also, you're going to want to probably do that anyway, because you remove those casualties, and now fewer of those Crusaders are going to be able to pile in and attack. So it's it's a twofold benefit. So fight on death is amazing for that.
Yeah, and so then you look at the god specific strats. We've already spoken about 4 of them. The last one's the reroll wounds, which we've already mentioned. Obviously works really well on a unit that already is rerolling hits. Rerolling wounds is really, really good on all the weapon profiles, including Abaddon's weapons.
Yep.
So that's just a really powerful strat to have access to. So you've got all those strats, including then Profane Zeal. And then as well, there are some really good neutral strats that are accessible. So obviously we know Interrupt's really good.
Yep.
But something that is really powerful is going to ground.
Yeah.
So some people might be like, why would you want to go to ground with Terminators? This is like a play that you need to be very, very premeditated when you decide and situationally aware when you use this. There's like a couple of really important ways you can use go to ground. One of them is to help you dictate when Terminators die. So we know Terminators have a 2-up save and a 4-up invuln save.
Yep.
But when you go to ground, you also gain a 6-up invuln save.
Yes.
Which you can choose to use instead of a 4-up invuln or a 2-up armor.
And this is one thing that I know a lot of people really struggle to sort of wrap their head around, is that why would you choose to use a worse save? So do you want to run us through that?
So someone might say, okay, I've set up 2 units to shoot through your Nurgle strat, right? But I don't want to shoot you out of range of your Nurgle strat, so I'm going to shoot my first unit. So say they've set up with a Riptide and a Crisis Bomb.
Yeah.
So they go, my Riptide's probably only going to kill 2 Terminators.
Yeah, but the Crisis Bomb's going to kill 6.
I
don't want to kill 6 first, because then I'm out of range.
Yeah.
So they shoot with the Riptide.
So I shoot with a Riptide first. And you say, okay, shooting with a Riptide, you're declaring your weapons, you're declaring all your attacks into me. Cool. I'm going to go to ground and also, hypothetically, in this situation, pop the Nurgle strat at the same time, because when you go to ground, you battle shock yourself out of being able to use other strats.
Yep.
So you need to be able to do this, sequence this in the right.
So you use the Nurgle strat first, then you go to ground.
And go to ground.
Yep.
Or yeah, exactly.
Yep.
You say, okay, so I've sequenced my strats correctly, and now you're giving me a bunch of wounds that I can decide how to take them.
Yeah.
So what you would do is you would take them on the 6-up invuln until you've essentially you've pushed yourself out of range of the Crisis Bomb.
And then you start taking
And then you go back to your better 4-ups or 2-ups. And what you've done is you might have lost a few extra wounds from the Riptide that you weren't going to, but you've actually pushed out a devastating blow that was going to occur when you were going to lose 6 from the Crisis Bomb.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that single-handedly can win you the game, because then they've
set up this massive blow, and then you've denied them that, and then it ticks over into your turn. You resurrect one of those models. Now you go in and you kill the Crisis.
And that just wins the game. They say, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." And that's one of those situations where you have to decide based on who you're playing, what their intent is, how close the game is. Because sometimes you might say, "Okay, now that you know I can do that, we can talk out. We can."
Yeah.
If you want to go with a Crisis unit first, fine. But if you're versing someone that's a top level player that is there to win, then that's a good play you've made. You've earned that advantage.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you, as you said, you res a model, advance, and you just win the game.
Yeah.
So go to ground is a super important strat. It's also really good to use in conjunction with Armor of Contempt.
Yep.
The same kind of thing. You have to Armor of Contempt first, then go to ground.
Yep.
And if someone's shooting you with a bunch of AP2 stuff, and they're basically denied you cover, they're like, "Yep, you don't have cover on any of these models. I can see all of your unit.
Yeah.
I'm going to get you from your 2-up save to your 4-up save, and I'm going to blow you up." You say, "Well, actually, I'm going to bring your AP down by 1, increase my save by 1,
Yeah.
and I'm going to have 2-up saves again."
Yeah.
And that's really huge.
Yeah.
3 CP, but it matters.
Yeah, because then all of a sudden, once again, that's a situation where they've presented a bomb because they're planning to do that heavy damage, and if they fail to do it, well, now you still have the Terminators alive that are going to go in and do their damage.
Yeah, exactly.
So
at the end of the day, I just went down the wrong way. But I think these are the kinds of things that people might be listening to this and going, "Well, that sounds really hard to use. How do I save CP? How do I know when to do this?" I think the tips I would suggest would be, if you're using this unit, you can't expect to take this to a tournament and be playing it at its best capacity straight away. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You need to be able to say, "I'm going to put 10, 20, 30 practice games into this list before I'm comfortable with playing the Terminator Bomb." Another thing that's really important is CP management.
Yeah.
So you might be thinking, saving that 3 or 4 CP or 5 CP means taking really judicious and really austere decisions in turn 1.
Yeah.
And turn 2.
Yeah.
Someone shoots you and you say, "You know what, I kind of want to Nurgle strat that Rhino, or I want to Nurgle strat that unit of whatever it is, but I can afford to just take the hit."
Yeah.
Or it might be a matter of deciding, "I really want to be able to advance and charge with this Legionary unit out of this Rhino, but that will make the charge, I'll need, say you might need 7 on 3d6.
Yeah.
But you might say, "Yeah, I need 7 on 3d6, but I can afford to fail the charge.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go for the 7 on 2d6 instead."
Yeah. So my general rule of thumb when making those decisions is, will spending this command point directly translate into victory points? And if it won't, don't do it. Because there will eventually become a time where doing it will. So that could be something like, okay, cool, you've just charged me, but if I spend the CP to fight on death, I'm going to eliminate that unit, which is going to prevent you from getting on this objective, which means I'm going to hold it in the command phase, which means that's going to be victory points on the board. So in that situation, yes, spend the CP, get the victory points. But if you've got a Rhino that's out in the open and they're going to shoot it and blow up your Rhino, but it's like, well, the Rhino's not on an objective, or maybe it is, but it's got guys inside of it. It's like, does it really matter if they blow up
And also,
the Rhino?
are they actually going to kill it? Like, if they're shooting it with, like, a Predator,
Yeah.
you're like, well, I'm copying a few las cannon hits. I'm still going to get an armor save.
Yeah.
They have to roll good damage.
Yeah.
I'm actually okay with taking the hit. Or they're shooting you with the Nurgle strap. They're shooting you and you're contemplating the Nurgle strap, but the target they're going to reallocate to is also a decent target.
Yeah.
So you might say, yeah, the Nurgle strap gains me a little bit in terms of shooting, denying them their preferred target, but they still have a good secondary target, so stuff it, I'll let them shoot the primary target.
Yeah.
And being a little bit just conservative with the way you retain your CP. If you're able to go into like turn 3 with 5 CP or something like that with the Termi Bomb, that's when things go wild.
Yeah. And I think the other part to this, and I guess this leads into the next question, is about deployment and the way that you actually wield the unit on the tabletop. But I think you want to tempo your CP usage at the same rate as your usage of the unit. Right? So if you know, okay, I'm going to save it for turn 3, I'm going to bank my CP. Well, if you're doing that, you also need to make sure you keep that Terminator unit alive until turn 3. Because if you send it out there to go do work, and people whittle it down to the point where it's like two Terminators and Abaddon, it doesn't matter if you've got 5 CP, the unit's neutered. So how do you deploy the unit? I know obviously it's going to vary depending on your opponent, but what's your general advice for deploying the unit and wielding it on the table?
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not 1, not 2, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 10th edition Warhammer 40k.
Well, so there's a few, that's a really good point. And I think this is where a lot of people, including myself, by the way, have made mistakes in games where you're too aggressive with the unit and then it backfires dramatically.
Yeah.
So there's a few things to note that are kind of, I guess, peripheral or residual things that are important. The first is, well, if we're deciding, or we're kind of contemplating that maybe for a couple of turns we're going to be playing defensive with this unit, we're not going to just throw it in their face and get hit by their whole army.
Yeah.
We're going to give ourselves time to like pick out a couple of things and disrupt our opponent a little bit and maybe create a more favorable position where the Termies can push in.
Yeah.
In that situation, well, we can't just have a 700-point unit doing nothing for 2 turns. So the ways we can get it to start pulling its weight is Abby does extend an aura of rerolls.
Yep.
So he also extends an aura potentially of 4-up invuln. There was a previous world where people were using like cultists to gain the 4-up invuln, and Abby was giving value through that.
Yeah.
I think now with the current meta and the current balanced data slate, we have to look at the rerolls.
Yeah, especially if people are talking about taking things like Predators nowadays with Mark of Nurgle for those exploding 5s. Rerolls on them are very good. You know, the Forge Fiends used to come on and just use the Undivided strat to get reroll hits and wounds. They're not doing that anymore, so the reroll hits is significantly more relevant, I find. So yeah, I agree that he's going to sort of perform almost like a guardian kind of role, where he's in your backfield, he's holding it down, he's buffing nearby units, and he's forcing your opponent to stay away. Your opponent can't come anywhere near your deployment zone because he's going to pop out and eviscerate.
Yeah. So if you consider a table where you've got like a kind of an L-shaped ruin with a bottom level kind of covered, and it might be kind of at the tip of your deployment zone or just out of your deployment zone, that's an opportunity where the Terminator unit with Abby can push into that gap. So they're moving up a little bit. They're gaining a little bit of space on the board. They might be something like about 7-8 inches from the center of the table. So they've pushed out of your deployment zone. They're hidden in an L. You can position Abby wherever the rerolls are needed. So he might be on like one of the sides of the L's.
Yep.
So that whatever you have on that flank, just looking outside of your defensive cover, is gaining rerolls.
Yeah.
So you might have a couple of Predators. You might have a couple of Havoc units, or let's say one Havoc unit. You might have a Land Raider. There's lots of things that can shoot long range that can benefit from rerolls.
Yep.
There is still merit, I think, and people might. I mean, this is something depending on the player and the meta. There is still some world where you can take Obliterators.
Yeah.
And I think the reason we can talk about Obliterators as a unit in this context is twofold. Firstly, Obliterators gain really, really good utility out of the Nurgle strat. We know that.
Yep.
The nerf to the Undivided strat, right, or the way in which it's been nerfed, won't matter if you're near Abby. So if you're worried about losing rerolls but keeping rerolls to wound, you can take Undivided a Blitz but just deploy the near Abby and you get your rerolls back.
Yep.
Or you can just take Nurgle a Blitz
and
go with Abby anyway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, either way, you kind of retaining a really good benefit from Abby there.
Yep.
Obliterators also, while they cost a little bit more points, they've gained some benefits in the meta. And I think one benefit to note they've gained is the way that Melter has been ruled, with the rulings of the way modifiers apply.
Yeah.
So Melter applying after negative damage effects is really good.
Yeah, because it means those things that have half incoming damage, you're still getting all of that Melter damage through.
So if in a world where you're worried about like Catan, Obliterator unit that can drop and be putting out 4 damage going down to 2 but going back up to 4, 4 damage chunks into Catans is very good.
Yeah.
That's going to be pushing them, like killing them pretty effectively.
Yeah.
So that's really nice.
And it's worth noting that the reason that's entered the conversation is because it's relevant to the fact you have Abaddon and the Terminators. Because Abaddon unlocks the capacity of those Obliterators, to do that.
Yeah, and the Obliterators can also do the thing we've spoken about in the past, where they come down, they drop within Abaddon's rerolls, they fire directly. They fire indirectly.
Yeah, but they make sure that they can see something directly.
Yeah.
And that way they fire indirectly, they kill something, and then the second your opponent goes to move that thing, they get to fire Overwatch and kill that as well.
Yeah, so like let's use an example of they fire indirect into something good, but they deploy to be within 24 inches of a unit that's going to want to move within range to shoot them to avert the Nurgle strat.
Yeah.
So say that something's going to want to come in to shoot them. So you say that thing that is going to want to come forward to shoot my Obliterators to get within 18. I'm obviously within 24 and can see it. So as soon as it moves within 18 to shoot me, I'm overwatching it.
Yeah.
And that is pretty good when you're getting full rerolls on Obliterators. Can just destroy what's coming in to kill them. And if your opponent plans their turn around that, then it can really disrupt them.
Yep.
So Obliterators, I think, as much as they are not in a great spot, in this particular list, they're probably as good as they're ever going to get. This is the best place they're ever going to be.
Yeah. Well, that actually segues perfectly into sort of the next question, which is if we're talking about Terminators, right? We've already outlined, the loadouts, how to wield them, what strats to use on them, how to sort of run them on the tabletop. What does the rest of the list look like? If you're building a list around the first decision you've made is, let's say it's Abaddon and 10 Terminators, what are the things that you feel supplement that unit and complement it well?
Okay, so just to carry on, just finish the point. The previous point was just that you're gonna want a couple of units at least that are gonna get the benefit out of Abaddon's abilities.
Yes, yeah.
So whether it is units that want the 4-up invuln, or whether it is probably a 2 or 3 units that are going to use the rerolls to hit,
Yep.
you want a couple of those. So Predators, Obliterators,
Yep.
Havocs, Vindicators, whatever it might be.
Yep.
Also, just another good thing is loaded up Rhinos, like Rhinos that have making good use of firing points.
Yep.
So that's something you can think about as well, because you might think, well, I already want to have a Rhino with 2 units of Legionaries in it. If both of those Legionaries are shooting their chain cannon out of it,
and then you got all the bolters of the stuff.
Yeah, that Rhino goes nuts. Like it's shooting 24 chain cannon shots.
Yeah.
And the Rhino shots, all with exploding 5s with full rerolls.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yep. I also quite like a big unit of 10 Warp Talons with the Marcus Lanesh, because that's big enough that you can string some guys back to be able to get within Abaddon's reroll range. And now that unit's going in with reroll hits and wounds. So it's kind of functioning in a similar capacity to the old Chosen when you were using the strat to get reroll and wounds, hits and wounds. But obviously it's got fly, it's got some other benefits.
Yeah, so some things, you're definitely going to want some things to make use of the rerolls. Then you think, okay, well, another note is if you've got a massive 700-point unit, you're going to need some MSU.
Yeah.
So that's where you get things like you mentioned. You're going to want some units of like MSU stuff. So I would say Warp Talons are probably the best one.
Yep.
Raptors are pretty good now because they're like distinctly at a distinct price difference to Warp Talons.
Yep.
So maybe a unit or 2 of Raptors. Some things that can just really threaten opponent's backfield from Deep Strike, like the Warp Talons. I also think as well, and this is something that probably we need to talk about, is what Demon Allies are looking a lot worse.
Yes.
Demon Allies are not something we're probably considering. So where are we getting those really, really cheap trash units?
I think Nurglings are still eligible to be considered in a list because they're battle line. You can just take them. You don't have to bring anything else. But you're definitely not bringing things like Celeste. You're definitely not bringing the Zeech characters like Changeling and the Blue Scribes. So I think we need to find, ideally, within our own codex, answers to these challenges.
And that's hard. And I think that's where you kind of say, well, in this world where maybe the Chosen and the Lords in Chosen, if we're taking this Terminator brick, that's kind of replacing that in a way.
Yeah.
We still need some efficient forward trading pieces that can push out and take objectives.
Yeah.
Where we don't want to throw the Terminators away. So we probably want to look at maybe a Rhino or 2 with Legionaries.
Yep.
Maybe we still take a unit of Chosen.
Yeah.
But we need to kind of be very efficient with these choices.
I think a unit of Chosen, if you take it with Fabius Bile, is still pretty good. Like, yeah, the Chosen went up, but if you're not also factoring in the points increase on the Lord, you're going, well, we're taking Fabius instead. Now it's kind of interesting. It's you don't feel the sting quite as badly.
Yep, that still works. So I think that the main idea, though, is with this big unit, the rest of your army really, really needs to be able to do the things, especially the turn 1 and 2 things when the Terminators are kind of chilling and building CP and not just
powering up. Yeah,
so you want to say, okay, well, what am I going to like go out and grab, extend battle lines or control secure no man's land or area denial? What's going to do that?
Yeah.
And then that's where the things like those cheap, fast units, unit of Raptors is quite good at that.
Yep.
Having maybe an extra unit of Cultists in the list, just that you can jump out of a Rhino onto an objective to take an objective. So cheap units that basically allow you to satisfy objective conditions cheaply.
Yep.
Early game.
I think this also lends into one of the things we've discussed a fair bit is Huron, because what he's going to allow you to do is deploy that Rhino with the Cultists. Actually, I don't think he can redeploy vehicles, but either way, he's going to allow you to deploy certain units like your Raptors and whatnot quite aggressively. And then if your opponent does get that first turn, you can redeploy them back into safety. It also means that you could potentially deploy the Terminators aggressively and redeploy them back.
Well, yeah, Huron, like some TOs, and this is something obviously you have to talk to your TO about, because definitely there are some TOs that have ruled that this decision happens after you know who goes first, which makes Huron really good. But then some TOs have ruled that this happens before you know who goes first, which makes the ability a lot less interesting.
Yeah.
But either way, there is still merit, because even if it's ruled in the worst way, which is that you have to redeploy even before you know who goes first, your opponent still has to consider your deployment, and you still get to see the rest of their deployment.
Correct.
So you can, for example, deploy a unit of Raptors in a really kind of audacious spot and say, well, you would have to deploy a unit that can see them for turn 1 or something like that. And bait your opponent into making that counter deploy, and then you just put them in reserve or deploy them somewhere else.
Yeah.
So there's still merit. I think Huron is a really interesting unit, because there are worlds where that redeploy is invaluable, but then sometimes you deploy and the Huron opportunity, the redeploy comes up, and you go, you know what, I'm actually just happy with where I am.
Yeah.
So sometimes you play it and you don't really use it. So it's one of those options, but I think it is in a world where these little small infantry units are super valuable, that ability becomes valuable as well.
I think it's also worth noting the psychological component of having redeploy in your army, because it means that when you deploy something, you insulate yourself against mistakes. If you deploy something and then your opponent starts deploying things and you're like, oh, I'm such a dumbass, I didn't realize that you could, you can be like, okay, cool, now I'm not a dumbass, like I've just fixed it, right? So that's really valuable, and it sort of emboldens you, but also it means your opponent can't really commit to anything during deployment, because often there's only going to be sort of, one area that they can see. They can't see every area of your deployment. So they'll go, cool, you deploy here, they line up so that they can see it, and then you just redeploy to the area that they didn't line up for.
Yeah.
So even though you're not going to know who's going first or not, you can still redeploy into relative safety.
It also means on a very basic level, like with the Terminators, you can deploy the Terminators, some not fully aggressively, but in an aggressive posture that your opponent has to consider. And if they deploy significant resources into like really insulating from that Terminator deployment, you can just put them in reserves.
Yeah.
So that's really, I think, a valuable ability, and I'd be really interested to see how he plays out, because in a world where the Chaos Lords got nerfed, the other characters gain more merit, more utility. Yeah. So yeah, Huron is cool for sure.
Yeah. All right. Anything else that you think we should talk about when discussing the Terminators?
The only other thing I think is worth touching on, just because I know we've kind of focused the conversation on a unit with Abby in it, I do think for people that don't like Abby or feel like, as you said,
be a Night Lords player out there, or Iron Warriors player that just doesn't want to run Abby for the sake of not running Abby.
And they might just have had bad experiences with him, and just that it's just too expensive, too many points in one unit. I do genuinely think the Chaos Lord in the unit, whether it's 5 or 10, is also really good. Yep. I think the Chaos Lord's probably better in a unit of 5.
Yep.
Because, as you mentioned earlier, when you go to 10, you want that bigger force multiplier.
Yeah.
But unit of 5 with the Chaos Lord is a really formidable unit, mainly because the Chaos Lord making Armor of Contempt 0 on a 2 CP strat 0 on Terminators is pretty wild.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan of the Sorcerer, because he has the ability to impact the saves or increase the AP of attacks, which when you're taking all of those bolters, being able to effectively make them all AP 1 is quite relevant. So if you're taking... I think there's a world where you take Abaddon in a unit of 10 and another unit of 5 with a Sorcerer in it, so that unit can drop down, light up a target, and then Abaddon's unit comes out and just goes nuclear on it.
Yeah,
depends on the meta.
That's
obviously,
pretty cool.
If you're playing into a meta like where Custodians have made a new rise, and you're versing things where there's there's big chunky units, maybe it's a Crisis Suit Star, or and you want to be able to just go, no, I am just going to destroy that thing.
That is very cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think the Sorcerer is a good unit. I do agree though that the 5-mans where 5-man Terminator in the past would just definitely been overlooked by Chosen. You 100% would have just very, very much reconsidered a choice of 5. Now it's a lot closer.
Yeah.
And the character options start to look better when the alternative is not a 75-point Chaos Lord.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cool stuff out there. A lot of experimentation still going to get done. But where we see a couple of nerfs, because people might be wondering, where is this coming from? I think it's not just, as you said, the Chaos Lord nerf and the nerf to Chosen. The nerf you mentioned earlier, the Profane Zeal nerf, not giving rerolls to hit anymore, makes that inherent Terminator reroll ability better.
Yeah.
It's just harder to get rerolls to hit now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's like, the Terminators always had the reroll sits, so they were actually always good. They were just overshadowed by things that could gain that same utility through a stratagem. Now that those things don't exist, it's like the Terminators are kind of like, the nerdy chick that takes off her glasses and you realise she's hot. She was actually hot the whole time. Right? She was always hot. And now, we're starting to realise it.
Yeah, and there's still other things in the meta that are scary. Like, yes, Chaos Forge Fiends might not be as common, the CSM Forge Fiends. You still might see, like, World Eaters Forge Fiends now might come into play.
Yeah.
But when the dev wounds aren't a threat anymore with the full rerolls and the explodings, like a World Eaters Forge Fiend might put like 5 or 6 or 3 or whatever, how many wounds onto you, but you're still going to get your invulnerable save as Terminators.
A World Eaters Forge Fiend and a Chaos Space Marine Forge Fiend is not the same unit.
No, they're not.
In any world, it's almost offensive they have the same name on the data sheet.
Right.
Like, they're so different.
That's true.
So yeah, and I think the main one for me is I think that we're going to see a pivot in the meta where I think people are going to be less concerned with being able to deal with 3-wound models. Like, I know at the most recent tournament I went to before the data slate, I was looking at taking things like Bloodletters with a Rendmaster specifically so I could get some 3 damage attacks into my World Eaters list. And that was specifically because most of World Eater stuff is damage 2, and so many people were running CSM. There was so many Chosen around. I was like, if I can effectively counter the Chosen, then it's worth doing. And I think people are going to stop doing that now. I think people are going to be like, cool, there's all of these other things. Like, 3 damage weapons aren't particularly effective into Necrons. 3 damage weapons aren't particularly effective into a lot of the stuff that we are expecting to rise to the top of the meta. So I think as those weapons, sort of fade away, the Terminators become a real problem again.
Yeah. And they're fun to play. It's cool that they're in that good spot when they really do feel powerful. The thing about Terminators that's most disappointing is just that historically, as you said, when you're getting hit by 3 damage attacks, the fact they don't ever feel no pain kind of is a bit annoying, and they just die. But as we see a reduction in that damage output, we will see Terminators be a little bit more viable.
Yeah.
The only thing, though, as stated, and this is probably a good way to round out the video, is just to be a little bit persistent and not to get deterred.
Yeah.
The Nurgle strat's going to be very difficult to use.
Yeah.
Knowing when to pop it, knowing how far, even that couple of extra inches you go out might be the difference between your unit getting blown up. So it just requires a bit of practice, a bit of patience. And I would definitely be, suggesting that people give it a solid practice shot before they dismiss this unit as being bad or being too easy to kill.
Yeah.
Because as we said earlier, if you just do a couple of cool little tricks, that game can just be over the next turn. Your opponent can make their play and you shut it down and then the game's over.
Yeah, they're sort of like nunchucks in the way that, like, if you see a master wielding them, super intimidating, right? But that master has hit himself in the nuts with those nunchucks so many times before he mastered it.
That's true.
You need to be able to go, I'm going to persist with this, and then when you do master it, and you're able to actually bring it forth and have that one turn where you saved up the CP appropriately, you protected the unit appropriately, you then launched it out at the right time, you play the tricks with the removing casualties, and then you get your go turn, people are just going to be like, holy crap.
Very often I play the people that I am kind of regular opponents of, just know not to even shoot my Terminators. They just don't shoot them because they know the amount of tricks that can happen with them.
Yeah.
And the best part about it is they're all modular. Like when we talk about things like the go to ground combined with the Nurgle strat, or the Armor of Contempt combined with go to ground, or the res and advance and charge, or the different ways you want to use them. They're all modular, and when you're sitting on that 4 or 5 CP bank, you've got all these different ways to spend that 4 or 5 CP.
Yeah.
You're not committing to one strat or one combination of strats.
Yeah.
So when your opponent kind of asks you what you can do, the actual response is, well, there's like 8 or 9 strats that are really good on these Terminators.
Yeah. Like,
these are the strats. That's what I can do in any order. So take that information and do with it what you will.
Yeah.
And that's a very genuine response. You're not like misleading your opponent. You're not averting the question because the actual answer is, I'm planning to use any of these 6 or 7 or 8 strats in combination in different sequences.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you exactly what
you realistically do. The best way to approach that situation is if your opponent says, like, what to that Terminator unit, like, what strats have you got, what can you do? You literally just give them a link to this video.
Yeah.
You'd be like, there you go, mate.
And click the clock to that.
Because it's literally going to take however long this video is going for, like an hour, to explain what I can do with this.
But as an opponent, so then you might be thinking, okay, well, if you're playing this, if you're the other side of the coin, if you're actually versing your friend who's playing this unit, what's the answer to dealing with this unit? I think the answer is, and this is, obviously undermining a little bit people that are going to run this unit, is if someone's running a 700-point unit that moves 5 inches,
just kill everything
and that really, exactly, if you just kill everything else, and do not allow them to get value out of resurrecting, do not allow them to get value out of getting really good survivability in these top saves, T5 models.
Don't let them use fights on death to ruin
if you
your game.
kill everything else, the as good as the Terminators are, as awesome as it is when they kind of spread, advance, and charge,
and just go
and
ham.
if you avoid them, they can't cover that much distance.
Yeah.
They can cover, they've got a threat range, but outside of that threat range, they're doing nothing.
Which is why it's really important that we re-emphasize that the rest of the list needs to be MSU.
It does.
Multiple small units, because you need to make it so that, cool, I've got 3 units of Raptors, just units of 5, and they're all in strat reserves, so that if you do have a turn where you go, cool, I'm going to kill your Warp Talons, I'm going to kill your Predator, and I'm going to kill your Vindicator over there, and I'm going to stay outside of your Terminator's range, it's like, cool, I need to go get an objective, I'm going to drop Raptors and go do it.
Yeah.
The Terminators are now pushing up.
They don't have what, like, Grey Knights or some other, like, even Custodes who can take, like, big Alaris units and redeploy them.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it with Bikers. The problem with that is you have to be close to the table edge, and often the areas where you're going to want to be doing work with those Bikers is not that close to the table edge. And then when they do come back on, they have to come on from a table edge, so it's very limited.
So, I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover, but at the end of the day, give it a shot with the Termies, and if it's not for you, it's not for you. Chaos, fortunately, still has a lot of good options, and
and I think there's two. I recommend playing like a good 10 to 15 games with the 10-man with Abaddon, and also explore like maybe 3 5-mans, like one with a Lord, one with a Sorcerer. Maybe just a unit of 5 with Abaddon, so you're not committing as hard into that one unit. So if it doesn't get value, it's not that big of a deal. And play around with those, and you might find some value there.
Yep.
But I think the Terminators, because they have the 4-up invulnerable save built in, because they have the reroll hits built in, because they're tough, they have access to Armor of Contempt on 2-up saves. They're just it's a really good unit. I think it's just a good unit.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Well, thanks for your time. I hope you guys found that interesting. And
thanks for having me as always, Dean.
All right. Cool. We'll talk to you soon.
Look for the Blood God.